Hello, hello. I am sorry that I am not speaking in Spanish. I hope that you will still be able to enjoy the presentation, and I look forward to any questions that you have on the content that I'm presenting. And as mentioned, my colleague Dario from Colombia is here and can also help with translating any questions that you have. My name is Christine Gould. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought for Food. And before I explain a little bit more about what we do, I'd like to ask a question to you. Are any of you involved in agriculture or food? If you can raise your hand. Awesome, okay. Are any of you thinking about pressing global challenges like climate change? Okay, well, I'm going to hopefully help you see that food and agriculture is the biggest lever that we have to solve our world's most important challenges. So last November, the population on planet Earth reached 8 billion people. This is the largest population that has ever been alive. And it's something unprecedented. I mean, we've never had this many people alive. We've done some incredible things as humanity, but we've also created a lot of negative consequences with our ways of living. These are pictures that have been taken over the past 6 to 9 months. Here you see biblical level floods in Pakistan. You have Hurricane Ian in Florida, which decimated, many cities there. I live in Europe, as mentioned, in Switzerland, and we've had the worst drought in 500 years affecting production across the continent. In fact, right now in the UK, the supermarket shelves are empty, in large part because they can't source the vegetables that they're used to sourcing from places like Spain due to climatic reasons. And we have forest fires and land use changes that come from, building the agricultural system that needs to feed 8 billion people. The IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, put out a report that said we are in code red for humanity. This is not climate change, it's a climate emergency. All systems are under threat as a direct result of climate change. And when I talk about systems, I'm talking about not only our environmental systems, but also our economic systems, our political systems. These are all affected by and affecting our abilities to solve these challenges. And at the core of the climate emergency is our food system. And these are just some of the realities that we're experiencing as citizens on the planet. We have the hottest temperatures on record, and they're increasing year on year. We're seeing that our soils are becoming eroded and degraded. And this is a big problem because our food production system starts with our soils, and our soils can also play a key role in sequestering atmospheric carbon and greenhouse gases. And when they're eroded and degraded, they're unable to do that. So they can't produce crops, and they also can't do their job in helping to make our ecosystems work and function well. We have oceans that are polluted with plastic, are being overfished, and this is also a key part of our ecosystems that we need to be paying attention to. And we have societal implosions because we have 1 billion people who are hungry and 1 billion people who are also obese or malnourished. And at the same time, on the same planet, where we have people who can't get enough food, we have 1/3 of the food that we produce, which is wasted, either on a farm or by consumers or in restaurants, because the food can't get to where it needs to go. Actually, that is a very interesting fact. We are producing enough food to feed the people, but we can't get it to the right place at the right time in the right quality, so it's wasted. And all of these problems have accelerated in terms of their negative impacts because of these forces, unexpected forces that have come to bear over the past couple of years, such as the pandemic, and the conflicts that have been going on around the world, but most notably the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because this part of the world is considered a breadbasket for global trade for crops like wheat. So we're in a vulnerable situation. We have a climate emergency that is making it harder to grow the food that we need, and we have all of these other failures in systems that mean that we're going to be rapidly going towards a world that is going to be worse for the people on it. And so the question that I think about every night and actually worry about, but also wake up every morning excited to solve, is this question. How are we going to feed 10 billion people on a hotter planet by 2050? So we're 8 billion right now. In a couple of decades, we're going to be 10 billion people, and we're going to be having all of these climate challenges. It's a big question. How are we going to feed these people? What are the crops going to be that we need to grow? How are they going to be produced? Using what type of agriculture systems? Should we be using biotechnology? Should we be using agroecology? How are we going to be transporting the food that we produce to the people who need it? What's the role of local food systems versus global food systems? We've been building global food systems over the past couple of decades, and those have brought great benefits, but they've also brought bad consequences, as experienced because of these supply chains disruptions. So I implore you to be thinking about this question, and not only thinking about it, but actually taking action to solve it. And that's what I do in my organization, Thought for Food. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what we do, but I want to also paint a picture about the realities of agriculture. Agriculture is, I'm so excited to see so many people here are involved in this sector. But it actually is a sector that is very hard to change. In English, we say there's a lot of inertia built into the system because of a few reasons. One is it's the least digitized industry sector. So you have farmers all over the world that aren't using smartphones, that aren't using data, they don't have information, and so they're not part of like the digital transformation that has changed every other part of our lives. I mean, many of you probably don't know what life was like without a smartphone, but I happen to remember those days. And I can tell you that, you know, things like having the ability to check a map, to know where you're gonna go, to be able to go online and find information at a click of a button has rapidly accelerated our ability to solve problems. But in farming, that information is not available. They don't have Google Maps for farming yet, but some people are building it, and we'll talk about that. Another big problem is just there's a big age problem. The average age of the world's farmer is over 65 years old. And actually, it's a sector that's highly stigmatized. Many young people are actively encouraged not to go into farming in many parts of the world because their parents and their grandparents want them to go to university and get jobs in cities where there's higher economic prospects because farming is very volatile and low wage. So you have this lack of digital transformation, and you have young people that aren't going into the sector. Who's going to feed the world when our aged farmers die? I mean, it's a real question to be asked. And this inertia is also the result of the fact that the food system is dominated by a few large players who've been following the same rules for decades. I'm happening to, drink from one of these major players, but they hold a lot of power, right? And so coming in with disruptive ideas and change, if they're not willing to change, these big companies, that power, that change isn't pushed into the farming system. And so how do we bring in new startups, new ideas that can change the game? How do we innovate in this sector that is so important to solve climate change and has these types of problems? Well, the organization that I've had the pleasure of building and now run is called Thought for Food. And we are an engine of innovation to transform food systems. And we do this by working with what I believe are the most equipped generations of all time to solve the prevailing challenges that we have. And that's you, our world's next generations. You may not realize it, but because of how you've grown up, the challenges that you've faced, and the opportunities that you have, you think and act differently than previous generations. Today's young people, millennials and Gen Zs, tend to be more globally minded, entrepreneurial, and digitally savvy than previous generations. And if you take those attributes and you connect that into all of the needs we have in food and agriculture, you see, like, that's a perfect fit. You can bring your digital savviness to make that digital transformation happen. You can take your entrepreneurial spirit, your open-mindedness to new ideas to drive change forward and disrupt the industry. And that is what we're equipping today's young people to do with the Thought for Food program. We're a platform that's inviting young people to say, hey, you want to change the world, you want to do something important, here's the space to do it, and we're going to equip you with the skills, the connections, and the investment that you need to take your ideas forward to make a difference. What we do is we actually help today's young people innovate. So when you have a good idea, we help you turn that idea into a solution, into a startup that can be invested in. So we run something called acceleration programs, and they, can run from weeks to many months, and that equips your idea into something that has a business model behind it and a pitch that you can take to investors so that they give you money to grow your idea. And we help you, talk to customers, be they farmers or food companies, so that, again, you can make a difference. We also empower the young people that we work with, as well as people who are working in the big companies that need to change, with new mindsets. We say we need to get past this inertia. We need to get past closed IP, intellectual property systems, and we need to move towards more open and collaborative models where there's more sharing of good ideas and best practices. I'll give a little anecdote here. This is my first time in Colombia, despite the fact I've been working with startups from this country for many years, and I freaking love it here, but it's really interesting. I spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia, and I see a lot of commonalities between the agricultural systems here, the needs here, and what I see when I'm going and visiting some of the farmers and the startups in Southeast Asia. And so what we're trying to do is get people across the world to be solving their local challenges, but to be sharing their ideas and best practices with each other so that everybody can do better faster. So it's that acceleration of the transformation we need to happen. And finally, we do a lot of shaping. So we're trying to get people excited about food and agriculture, to have a new narrative about what this sector is about, so that it's not seen as this poor, dying sector of old people, that it's seen as innovative and worthy of investment and creative and fun. So we organize events and we do movies and social media that brings a different type of energy into this space. And together, that really helps us become this hub of innovation that's attracting open-minded, collaborative, digitally savvy entrepreneurs to say, we're going to build solutions and we're going to change this so that we can feed 10 billion on a hotter planet. One of the key things that we do is we run an innovation challenge. So we actually ask that question, how do we feed 10 billion people on a hotter planet, to everyone? And we say, give us your solutions. What are your ideas? And that's an open call to action. And every year, this challenge, we get thousands of entries from every region of the world, and 180 countries took part last year. We select some of the best ideas that meet our criteria, and then we really help those solutions to go to the next level. We accelerate them. But here you can see a snapshot of some of the things that we see. We get an insight into trends and ideas that are taking form in their earliest days. So you can see some of the top solution spaces that innovators are jumping into. They're saying, I want to solve climate impact in agriculture. I want to regenerate soil so that they can become more nourishing and productive. I want to improve the ability for people, especially vulnerable populations, to access nutritious foods. I want to prevent food loss and waste. I want to make sure my supply chain is transparent and traceable from market back to the farm. I also want to make sure that my packaging isn't going to go pollute oceans and waterways, that we're going to have more sustainable materials. So those are some of the solution spaces we see from these applicants from 180 countries. And they're using super cutting edge science and technology to develop their solutions. They're using upcycling, vertical farming. Do you know what vertical farming is? It's a farming system where you grow indoors in completely optimized conditions, and you can grow upwards in buildings instead of outwards. And it's a very fascinating sector, but there's, within it, challenges that need to be solved, like the cost of energy and how to grow the right crops in these types of spaces. But you can see they're thinking about all of these technology areas. And, things like machine learning, biotechnology, which, we're here because it's a very interesting space. Fermentation, an ancient technology that has so much potential. We can now ferment pretty much everything. And then what my favorite thing to look at is always what I call the next gen approaches. So this is what I see today's young entrepreneurs coming in and doing. I call it business as unusual. We have an expression in English like business as usual, but this is business as unusual. This is saying I'm going to build businesses that are based on new values, around values of having impact at the core of what I'm doing, being collaborative, being open and transparent. So together we are really excited to support these types of solutions. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the trends that we're seeing with some examples of startups, which may inspire you and say you might want to start a startup in that space. Maybe you even have a startup yourself that we would love to work with you and connect you into our community of fellow entrepreneurs. But one exciting space is digital agriculture. As mentioned, this is the least digitized industry sector, so it's really easy to come in and deploy digital tools that can make a big difference on every single part of the agricultural value chain. One of the things that we ask our entrepreneurs, though, is don't just come in with a technological solution, because you're working with farmers, they're not used to working with it, so we ask WTF. And it doesn't mean what you think it means where's the farmer? Have you talked to a farmer? Have you developed your solution in collaboration with his or her needs? A couple of examples I wanted to highlight, and actually Dario can also talk about, because he developed a startup working on digital solutions, but Carubatech here in Colombia, led by my friend Paula, basically they're working with farmers all through the country to help them to get agronomic advice. That means information on what crops to grow, how to grow them, what inputs to use, what to do when there's a disease or a pest that affects them. And the way they deliver the advice to these growers is by simple WhatsApp messages and voice messages. So they have a network of experts, and they have a network of farmers, and they connect them, and they hold workshops to train the farmers about how to get this information and use it. It's a simple solution, but it makes a huge, huge difference. Easy Agro in Brazil is another really cool company. They've raised a lot of money and have a huge network of 60,000 farmers that they're working with. And they've created a digital marketplace where farmers can go, and in one click, they have information about where they can buy the seeds that they want to plant and the inputs that they want to use, with all the price information transparently available. But what's the best part about it is these farmers have formed a community with each other, and they're sharing knowledge and information with each other on this digital platform, saying, I planted this seed variety, here's what happened. Oh, do you have advice about what to do if this happens? And so it's a little bit different than the expert to farmer model. This is a farmer peer support group that is really taken off in Brazil. And I mentioned how we're trying to create knowledge sharing and collaboration, but this model is working in the US at massive scale. So it's really cool to see that, a similar business has started in Brazil, it's taking off. There's room for that in all markets, actually, to have these farmers support groups. Another exciting frontier, if anybody here is into genetic engineering or biotechnology, it's about how to take those techniques and deploy them into new crops. Right now, our food system is basically focused on 4 main crops, which provide 90% of the calories that we intake in the food that we eat. And those crops are soy, corn, rice, and wheat. We built an industrial food system that allows us to grow these crops efficiently at scale. It's completely optimized. We have trading systems that are geared around these crops. But what's happened is that has created a lack of resiliency. When you're only working on 4 crops that aren't very nourishing, actually, that means that if there's a disease that wipes out a crop, it has, it decimates our food system. Also, because of our hyper-focus on these 4 crops and the efficiency behind them, we've built something called monocultures, which means we're growing the same varieties row after row, season after season, year after year, and that's part of the reason our soils are degraded, because there's not time for the natural processes of ecology to jump in and help those soils become replenished by other types of crops and root systems. And so this has really created, in the US we had something called the Dust Bowl that happened from this overproduction of the same crop year on year. So we're asking our entrepreneurs, and we're seeing our entrepreneurs saying, how can we bring currently underutilized crops into the fore, into the focus? And sometimes people call these underutilized crops orphan crops, and I hate that word, because orphan crops, it sounds so sad. It sounds like, yeah, the poor little orphan, but actually, these are crops for the future. Many of these crops, there's 7,000 species that we could be looking towards for our food system, and many of them are naturally drought tolerant, water resistant, and highly nutritious, and possess attributes like gluten-free, et cetera, et cetera. So they really are the crops that we need for the future now that we know more about nourishment. So 2 companies that we've worked with that exemplify these crop opportunities. One is Rain-Fed Foods. Sujala is an entrepreneur based in Canada, but she's from India. She's obsessed with millet. I don't know if you know millet, but it's a grain, a small grain. It's actually grown pervasively around the world, primarily by smallholder women farmers. It's seen as kind of a crop for like poor people, actually. But she's mainstreaming it. She said this is a crop that is gluten-free, hypoallergenic. In India, they actually use it as infant formula because it's so healthy and safe for babies forming their digestive system to consume. And so she's created milk from millet that can be used just like oat milk or almond milk and all kinds of purposes for baking, for coffees, etc. And she's now going a step further, and she's actually launching a whole end-to-end program around millet with breeding programs and supply chain connections between these smallholder women producers and food companies that can commercialize millet products. The Live Green Co. is a company that came out of Chile. They're now headquartered in the US due to significant investment that they raised. But Priyanka is a entrepreneur that really saw something. She had a background in traditional medicine and ancient wisdom around how plants can be used for nutrition and for healing. In India, they call it Ayurvedic medicine, but it's based on a lot of indigenous wisdom. And she was looking at how she could take her knowledge in this space and use it in our food system for foods that people love, ice creams, hamburgers, etc. And so she developed a tool that can recommend to food production companies how they can replace animal or synthetic additives with plants. And so this is really exciting because right now there's a lot of synthetic chemicals in our food. We know that they're not great for us. And if we can find natural plant-based alternatives, it actually makes the foods we eat healthier, the foods we love to eat, like ice creams, healthier, can deliver all the functional properties that we need. And it's unleashing the power of these currently underutilized crops. So it's improving the supply chain by diversifying it. Has anyone here heard of something called the circular economy? Some people have heard of it, yeah. So the circular economy is a new way of thinking about our supply chains and about how we produce things, moving away from extractive processes where we take something from the environment and make something from it and then discard it and pollute the environment, to thinking about how we can have a system that goes back and regenerates and replenishes the environment and communities. And so we're seeing that today's next generation entrepreneurs are developing solutions that are circular by design. They're going beyond just upcycling. Upcycling means that you take byproducts like agricultural waste and you make something with it, but they're actually making something with it that can go back and make the world a better place. So here's two companies that exemplify some of these circular economy approaches. Bezeos in Norway are taking algae that is grown by smallholder women farmers, so it's ocean-produced algae, and they are turning that into a home compostable plastic alternative. And they have some major partners in the food industry, and I want to just hone in on the word home compostable. That means you can take their product, which looks and feels and has similar properties to plastic, and you can throw it into your back garden, and it will go into the soil and actually nourish the soil with the nutrients that were in the algae that it's made from. So it's just like composting. If you take a banana peel and put it into your soil, it helps that soil become, healthier. Their plastic product can do that. That is a game changer for all of the food that we love to consume. If we can move away from fossil fuel-based plastics to these regeneratively grown seaweed products, it starts to make, the convenience that we need in our food system something positive for the planet. Elixir Foods in Brazil, they are obsessed with chocolate. I've known this company for many years, actually. They first came to Thought for Food with a plant-based chocolate spread, which was cool. But now they've gone a step further, and they're working with cocoa farmers, and they've noticed that there is, when they're processing the cocoa pod, there's this liquid that is discarded usually. It's called cocoa honey. I don't know if that's what it's called in Colombia, but it's like a white liquid that's in the pod. And sometimes the farmers keep this cocoa honey because it has a lot of nutrients and beneficial properties. But most of the time it's discarded, and it actually pollutes the environment because so much of it is discarded from cocoa processing. And if the farmers do keep it, it doesn't last very long. It's not stable, and it goes bad. But they found a process where they can actually work with these farmers, stabilize this cocoa product, and then turn it into a liquid and powder form, or a cream form, I should say, and a powder form that can then be used as a sugar replacement and all kinds of uses. So they're starting with cakes and biscuits, and they're going into the confectionery industry and saying, hey, sugar is great, but a lot of people can't have it because they have diabetes. It also, too much sugar we know leads to some chronic illnesses. So we now have a plant-based alternative that is not just adding these phytonutrients into the foods that we love to eat, but it's also supporting these cocoa growers to have an additional revenue stream from a product that they would otherwise be throwing away. And they're also looking at further uses for the cocoa honey, for example, as a soil conditioner to help improve soils because it is so nutritious, this product. So it's a really interesting company, one to watch from Brazil. And since we're here, with Agro-Bio, we're talking about biotechnology. And one of the things I started my career, when you talked about biotechnology or you talked about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, I don't know what the word is in Spanish. GMO? Ojene, yeah. Ojeme, sorry. Many people were against it. Many people had a fear of it, said it was playing with nature, and this is something we need to be concerned about. But there's a new wave of entrepreneurs that are coming in and saying, actually, the technology itself is very interesting for solving some of the big challenges we face. But what we can do now is make this more accessible and more inclusive. We can use biotechnology not just to increase yields and make big companies more profitable, but to actually get in the hands of smallholder farmers and to make better food products for consumers. So we worked with a company in the US called Spira, and they're actually using gene editing, which is a type of genetic engineering that is, more precise. And you'll hear about that from the next speaker. But they're using gene editing with a microalgae called spirulina that grows, on ponds. It grows in a lot of places. And they're using gene editing to take out the fishy taste in this algae, and they've created natural dyes that can be used in foods, as well as for fabrics and cosmetics. So hey, why not have a healthy, nutritious cocktail? But you can use it for, like I said, like makeup. You can use it for fabrics, because so much of like what we're doing right now is petroleum based, and we know that we need to move towards a future that is fossil fuel free. And Zelia in Mexico is using a biotech process called fermentation to turn crop residues, in this case corn residues, like the husks and the stems that are left by farmers. They ferment that, and they are using that to make xylitol, which is a sugar replacement, again used especially for people who have diabetes. It's also like used in chewing gum because it has like beneficial properties for teeth. Dentists always recommend xylitol. So it's a cool solution using the power of biotech to, again, provide an additional revenue stream for growers, use a waste product and buy stream to create something beneficial for our food system. And finally, another category I want to talk about is I've been espousing or talking about how important soils are. Soils are really the basis of our food system. And unfortunately, we haven't been paying enough attention to them, and they've been degraded and they're sterile. And this summer, I was, listening to some podcasts and looking at these beautiful photos of outer space that the James Webb Telescope was taking. It was showing us our universe in like a vivid portrayal that I'd never seen before. And it was instilling a sense of wonder and awe in people all over the world to see these pictures. But what I want to tell you is that in our soil, beneath our feet, are universes of microorganisms, of fungi, of worms. And these universes deserve the same wonder and awe, and they're just as beautiful as what we have in outer space. And we need to be protecting them and thinking about them. And so what I'm excited to see with these entrepreneurs is they're saying, like, if we want to build a better food system, we need to solve our soils. In Lebanon has launched a company that is using the power of worms to create better soil fertilizers. We faced a fertilizer shortage due to the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia is the #1 exporter of synthetic fertilizers in the world, and they put in export restrictions, which meant farmers everywhere were unable to get fertilizers that they needed. They also not only export the fertilizers themselves, but the chemicals that are used to make fertilizers. So it had a big effect in raising prices of food products, and we're all feeling the results of food inflation. Nada's system uses decentralization. You can take worms anywhere and use her system, which has nanotechnology and microbes, to create these soil fertilizers at scale everywhere in the world. And it's called vermicompost. I don't know if anyone knows about vermicompost, but what's really interesting about her model is it's always been seen as kind of like niche and small scale, but she's doing this at industrial scale. She is getting tens of tons of waste, of organic waste from cities in Lebanon, and converting that into soils that are then used by farmers, and they're spreading all over the world. Another company that I love is Humica from Mexico. And they're obsessed with soil too. And their solution is actually based on an 8,000-year-old practice called biochar. This was used in the Amazon literally 8,000 years ago. And it is a way of kind of burning crop residues and organic materials and making this kind of charcoal that you can spread onto agricultural land. And it improves absorbency of water. It also improves the soil nutrition, so it can help to make crops grow better without the need for synthetic fertilizers. What they've done is they've actually built a platform that uses artificial intelligence to do a quick analysis of a soil sample on a farm, and it then makes a recommendation for the type of biochar, the recipe of the biochar that should be applied to that soil. And I just love the combination of this ancient wisdom with advanced technologies to do something new that hasn't been done before. And it's really exciting to see biochar is becoming something that big companies, Microsoft is investing in biochar right now. This is a space that is getting a lot of attention in the world. So my message to you and my invitation to you is that food and agriculture is the world's most important industry. It touches every single one of us, everywhere on the planet, every single day, multiple times a day, hopefully. We have to eat, you know, every day. And it's also at the core of all of the global challenges that I mentioned. If you look at our 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, every single one of them can come back to food. You can't solve anything if you can't feed yourself and nourish yourself and your families. Even conflicts and wars have been predicated by failures of the food system, by famines. So this is something we need to be paying attention to. It's a huge market opportunity too. If I haven't convinced you that it's like a big problem to solve, there's an 11 trillion market to unlock by focusing on this. And I believe that, again, our world's next generations, you are exactly the ones that need to be leading the technological innovation, but also the how we innovate. It's not just having technologies. It's not just having digital tools and biotechnology. It's how we introduce them into the world, how we think about the problems we want to solve and the people we want to affect. We need to be focused on the big farmers, but also the small farmers, the women farmers, the vulnerable populations, the people at the front lines. And we have the power to do this. And that is what Thought for Food is here to do. We're taking action everywhere. Colombia is a big market for us. In our global challenge, every year we've had a finalist team from this country. So this is my invitation to you. If you have an idea, if you have a startup, here's your chance to get involved, to find a network of people who also believe in taking action to do something towards these challenges, and will provide you with the resources that you need to really do something and make a dent. So thank you very much for your time. I will end with my information. I would love it if you would connect, and I would love any questions that you have. And Dario can join me maybe to take the questions. Let me introduce Dario, and he can obviously speak Spanish as he is Colombian. But he won our global challenge in 2017 with his startup Visitando Futuro, which is a digital technology that is providing information about farmers throughout Colombia. So yeah, he'll join us.